Hey Wargamers, over the weekend Games Workshop released previews for the movement phase, the psychic phase, and the shooting phase, and what they're going to look like under 8th edition 40k. So today I want to talk about what those previews are and what they mean for how armies might play under 8th edition. Now, before we get into that, I just want to say thanks for watching. If you like this video, if you like any of my other videos, go ahead, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell. That way you keep up to date on all of my videos and don't miss anything coming out about 8th edition. So, all right, on to the good stuff. Starting with the movement phase, we learned basically 3 key things. They confirmed that, yes, every unit will have its own movement value. They talked about how Harlequins are going to be faster than Space Marines and things like that, which we knew. But they also addressed how this is specifically going to affect flyers. Flyers and potentially some other types of units are going to have minimum movement values, just as they do now. But that minimum value is going to vary based on the type of flyer or the army or anything like that. So the example they gave are fighters are going to have a larger minimum move distance than bombers because fighters are going to be moving faster than bombers. And this is cool. This actually helps distinguish some otherwise relatively similar flyers in the game. So particularly I'm thinking about the Tau flyers. The fighter is generally all around poorer choice than the bomber, save for a few situations. And while they're both subpar flyers overall, if you were to take a flyer, I'd almost always recommend the Sunshark bomber. But by having different move characteristics, they may be able to distinguish the fighter in a way that makes it more advantageous than the bomber in some situations. So again, we're seeing more nuance in some of the army composition, some of the unit types that we weren't seeing under previous editions of 40k, and that's a good thing. Anything that we can do to make more units viable more often is a good change in this edition. I think this is just part of that. It's a very minor change, but I think it has big implications for how army is going to be constructed and which units are going to be the best. Now, the biggest thing that we learned about the movement phase is that you can now voluntarily fall back from combat. Basically, if your unit gets charged on your opponent's turn, at the beginning of your turn, you can just leave combat. You can just walk away. And so long as you're far enough away from the unit at the end of the movement phase, you're out of combat. Now, you do give up the ability to fire. You cannot shoot after you fall back, but anyone else in your army can shoot at that unit that has now been disengaged. So this is this is big. This is a big change to how 40k is played, and there are some pros to this and some potential cons as well. So as far as pros go, this is great for shooty armies. It means that shooty armies can shoot. So if you have a shooty unit that gets locked up in combat and survives a single round of combat, they can just fall back and potentially live to see another day. Then the rest of the army can take advantage of that time and pound away at the assaulting unit. This is also good for assault armies in some ways because assault armies don't get tar pitted anymore. So it could be that an assault army has one particularly potent unit. In the past, you used to be able to pair one of your more durable units against that assaulty unit and basically nullify it for the rest of the game, or at least a significant period of the game. Now, if that assault unit gets tar pitted for a single turn, it can just walk away, which is great for assault units. It means that assault armies can choose which units they want to engage with, and that's good. Now the cons are that, of course, after the assault army chooses which unit it wants to engage with, there's no way that it can force itself to stay in combat with that unit. It used to be that an assault unit could basically hide in combat. It could stay in combat and not get shot at on its opponent's turn. But now you can't do that. So there's even more pressure on assault armies to A, use cover more effectively, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but also to have better target priority. They can't just go to the closest unit and then kind of work their way through the line. They have to select the unit that is going to do them the most harm and make sure that they get into close combat with that first. So in a lot of ways, good changes for assault armies, but it also makes things a little bit more challenging for assault armies because they have to have better control over where their army is positioned and who it's attacking, whereas before those were still very important things, but they had a little bit more flexibility in where they got into combat and what that meant for how the army played. Now, the second preview that we got was for the psychic phase, and again, there's three main things that we learned here. One is that they're basically scrapping the current psychic phase and replacing it with something completely new, which is more or less the Age of Sigmar style magic phase. So what that means is that they're moving to a 2-dice system where psychers can cast as many powers as are specified on their data sheet, and that's typically what their mastery level is now. And those powers are either cast or unsuccessfully cast based on a 2-dice roll where each power has a casting value, and you roll the 2 dice, and if you meet that casting value, then the power goes off. Now, this is pretty similar to how psychic powers used to be done before the current iteration of psychic mechanics. It used to be that you just took a leadership test. Now it's kind of similar to that, but instead of having it based strictly on your leadership, there's a specified cast value, which is fine. There's still an opportunity to deny the witch, although they didn't explicitly call it that, and that's related to the opponent psycher's mastery level in some way, but we don't know exactly what that means, if it's that they have to roll dice again or if it's just a complete nullification. I don't know. They didn't really go into that detail, but I would expect you roll off or something like that. I would assume that's not like just a, you know, okay, I'm just not going to allow you to cast that one power, but you can cast your other powers type of thing. In addition to these two features, every psyker knows the smite ability, and this kind of gives us a preview of what powers are going to be formatted like in 8th edition as well. The smite ability is cast on a 5-up, so you roll 2d6. If you get more than a 5, the power goes off, and it affects an enemy unit within 18 inches, and it does d3 mortal wounds, which means that they can't be saved by armor save, invulnerable save, or any means. So it's unclear again if that refers to things like feel no pain, but yeah, so mortal wounds can't be saved is what they're basically saying. So it does d3 mortal wounds, and if you roll higher than a 10, you get d6 mortal wounds. So again, it's some sort of scaling ability, which is kind of cool, as opposed to just having like a 1 warp charge or 2 warp charge ability. It scales based on what you roll. So that's good. And you know, this is a pretty basic rule in Age of Sigmar. There's 2 spells that every wizard knows. In 40k, there's 1 psychic power that every psyker knows, and I think that's nice. That gives some universality to the rule set and puts everyone on the same page. Especially if you have a psyker that isn't particularly potent, they always have this to rely on, and it's a good all-around mechanic. You could always use more mortal wounds, I suspect. So that's the psychic phase. Now the shooting phase is the third preview that we got, and again we got 3 preview rules. The first is that you can't run or what's now called advance and fall back and shoot. So if you run or fall back, you can't shoot in the shooting phase. And I guess I should also mention something that we learned in the movement phase is that they're actually rolling the run mechanic into the movement phase. So instead of having to move the model twice, you just roll for it in the movement phase. And this is something that people had been doing, casually for a long time. Like, you're rolling, you're going to run, so you say, hey, can I just roll now and not bother in the shooting phase to roll for running? Now they actually brought that into the rules, and I think that's likely some of the influence that we see from the guys at Frontline Gaming and Adepticon saying, hey, let's just speed this up a little bit. So great, that's awesome. And as far as its impact on shooting, that makes sense. You can't shoot if you're within 1 inch of an enemy, except for pistols, which is basically the new way of saying you can't shoot if you're in combat, with the exception of pistols, which they say will make characters like Cypher really good, and I agree. If you can shoot instead of punch in close combat, there are a lot of applications for that, and particularly with things like Blood Angels, where their pistols were okay, they're a good upgrade, but they're still pistols. Now they actually have a purpose, and they are congruent with the overall theme of the army trying to get into close combat. You can still use those pistols in close combat, therefore they benefit you through all the phases of the game instead of just in one phase that you don't really want to participate in the first place. So that's awesome. And then the third thing that they told us was how cover and modifiers are going to work. So on the current system, cover is really only used if you ignore an armor save. Under the new system, you can always benefit from cover. It's basically just a benefit to your armor save. So if you're behind a wall or something, you might get +1 to your armor save. And that means instead of having a 3-up armor save, you have a 2-up armor save. And so you're always benefiting from that. Similarly, you know, the AP value of weapons has been changed to a modifier. So instead of having this, you know, complete binary system where you either get an armor save or you don't, and if you don't, then you get a cover save, or you don't, then they've moved to this kind of gradient system where it's a tally of pluses and minuses. And I think that makes sense. I think that makes the game more intuitive, and also allows you to take advantage of terrain in a better and more consistent way. They also mentioned that heavy weapons are no longer going to just snap fire if they move. They'll just take a -1 modifier. And again, that kind of puts everything into this modifier category of pluses and minuses and makes things more consistent. And of course, there are still weapons that are going to ignore cover. So they mentioned like Lehman Russ weapons. Tau marker lights, I suspect, will still be able to ignore cover, or at least negate it in some way. So that's cool. It makes things without Relentless much better. So units that had heavy weapons that would have to snapfire if they moved, now they're better because they only take a -1 modifier as opposed to a snapshot. You know, that's for everyone except for maybe orcs. That, you know, that doesn't make a difference. They got a boost from this rule, but everything that has Relentless currently is consequently slightly less good in comparison to the alternative now. So things like Riptides, not necessarily as great of a increase in power over something like a broadside now, because broadsides can move and shoot more effectively than they could before. Cover is better if you get your armor save. If you don't get your armor save, then it's like the same, I think. But yeah, so overall, I think this makes cover more valuable. And, you know, one of the things about the game is that terrain is so important, and yet it's a hit or miss system in terms of how that terrain is implemented. With this new system, I think it makes terrain, again, more important, but also more nuanced. It brings it into more aspects of the game and allows you to actually use it and benefit from it in cases that you normally wouldn't, or at least you used to not be able to. So again, I like that change. I think this shooting phase preview makes the most sense out of the 3 previews that we've talked about today. I'm really excited about this. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think it's going to lead to better gameplay in the future. But really, before we can assess that, we have to see what the armies look like. And I'm hoping that we get a look at a little bit more details on those soon. But overall, thanks for watching. Again, let me know what you think in the comments below. And of course, happy wargaming.